The purchase order entry icon is where new purchase orders are created or where existing posted purchase orders can be recalled. The word New in the PO number field indicates that the next sequential purchase order number is assigned when it's posted. For new documents, leave this field so the system increments sequentially. To recall an existing posted purchase order, enter or select the purchase order number. For new purchase orders, enter or select a vendor number. If a vendor is entered that does not exist within accounts payable, the order can still continue, assuming the Allow Non-Existent Vendors option was selected within PO options. However, the vendor must be added in accounts payable before receipts or invoices can be posted. If a user has the appropriate rights, vendors can be added now by selecting the New button. This starts the vendor window found in Accounts Payable, as if it was being selected directly from within that module. The blue triangle here can be clicked to access vendor address and contact information currently found in Accounts Payable. Although changes can be made on this window, the changes entered do not update the vendor's account in Accounts Payable. Changes made on this window are for this order only. If permanent changes need to be made, make them in Accounts Payable. A template code can be entered to have the system default to selected fields, those fields discussed earlier as being available on a template. For example, you can default to a specific order type or automatically assign text in the description and reference fields. Templates can also be used to define default order and vendor settings, such as Ship To code, reference and description text, as well as payment term code. However, when entering a template, be careful with the tax group code. The tax group code identified with the vendor may be overwritten by the tax group identified with the template. If the template code is selected after the vendor was selected, the tax code assigned to the template is used, if it is different. By selecting the vendor code after the template, the tax group with the vendor is used. The other fields defined on a template appear regardless of the vendor template sequence. The system defaults to the date Accpac was started for the purchase order date. This date, of course, can be any date, past or future. The checkbox here represents the ability to create a purchase order for multiple separately posted requisitions. When selected, the blue up arrow displays this dialog box where the requisitions to merge together can be entered or selected using the Finder. All detail lines for any requisition listed on this window merges into one purchase order. If more than one requisition includes the same item, the item appears on separate detail lines. Let's select the requisition that was just posted. The Use Blank Vendors field determines if detail lines identified with a blank vendor on the requisition should be assigned to the vendor on this purchase order. Earlier, when creating the requisition, the vendor number field was left blank because at the time we didn't know which vendor to use. For this example, change this field to Yes. When the Use Blank Vendors field is set to Yes, the Use Vendor Type field becomes available. This corresponds to the vendor number identified with the item. For example, let's assume two items, item A and item B, are on a requisition that contain blank vendors. If item A has vendor 1200 specified as vendor 1 in inventory control, but item B does not, selecting vendor 1 here only brings item A into this purchase order, where if the Use Vendor Type field is set to No, both items appear on the purchase order for vendor 1200. The ordered column defines if a purchase order is or has been generated from this requisition. Because one hasn't yet, click the Insert key to save the line, and then the Order button to create one. When the Close button is clicked, those detail lines that match the criteria from the selected requisitions appear in the Detail section of the purchase order. Before moving on to the Details section, there are more fields to discuss in the Header section. The next field is the On Hold field. Select this option to place the purchase order on hold. Although a purchase order can be printed, items cannot be received until the On Hold status is removed. The PO Date field defaults to the date Accpac is started. Enter or select any date. As discussed earlier, an order can be created from one of these four order types. Active indicates that the order is ready to go and can be printed and sent to the vendor. If the same items are purchased regularly from a vendor, such as on a weekly or monthly basis, indicates standing here. Active orders can be generated periodically from a standing order while still keeping the standing order available on the system for the next occurrence. Think of a standing order as similar to a recurring order. Select Future to have Accpac activate the order on a future date. Future orders become active automatically when day-end processing is performed on the date entered. Blanket orders work off a monetary amount. Purchase orders can be created until the monetary amount is exhausted. Optionally enter an FOB location where shipping charges begin, and optionally enter an arrival date. You can then assign a default ship-to location code where the items are to be received. The location code entered here appears as the default when entering new detail lines in the lower section of this window. Existing items display the location code and when they were entered. The system may default to a location code if one is assigned with a template code, assuming a template code is entered above. Optionally enter a ship via method for the vendor to use, and then determine if the items should be billed to a different location, the bill to location code entered here. If the vendor provides discount terms, the term code assigned with the vendor in accounts payable appears as the default. Then optionally enter any description or reference information. The lower portion of the window is where the items to be ordered are entered. If the purchase order is created for one or more requisitions, those detail lines appear automatically. Items can be entered or modified using this container type interface where users cursor or tab across the columns or press the F9 zoom key. This view displays all the fields on one window. Whether this or the container view is preferred is your choice. When using the zoom view and a purchase order is entered for an item, only the current item is visible. Even so, the nice part about this view is it displays those fields that are accessible in white. Unavailable fields appear slightly grayed. By selecting the container type view, multiple detail lines are shown in the rows of the container section, but all the fields appear identically, whether or not they are valid for the particular item and vendor. The system skips the fields that are not valid, but they are not distinguished from valid fields by sight. The completed column indicates if the activity for this detail line is complete. A yes value occurs automatically when the item is fully received, or the field can be manually changed to yes if the item is canceled from the purchase order, possibly because the item is no longer. Fields for any existing item can be modified, or new items can be added. Let's add another item to this purchase order. Add some halogen desk lights to the order. These are needed at location 1. The desk lights are not going to be drop shipped to anyone, so that field is no. If you select yes and then click the blue up arrow, they could be drop shipped to a customer's address directly, bill to or ship to, a manually entered address, or an inventory location address. There's a sale coming up in a couple of weeks for these desk lights, so enter an order for 24 lights. Because desk lights are ordered and stocked individually, leave the unit of measure field at each. Accpac defaults to the assigned agreed-upon cost with the vendor, entered within the vendor contract costs icon in purchase order setup. Or, if one doesn't exist, defaults to the cost of the item in inventory control. The extended cost is calculated multiplying the quantity by the unit cost. If the extended cost is changed, the system divides the cost entered by the quantity to arrive at the unit cost. They optionally indicate to calculate a line item discount that the vendor may be providing. This discount is above and beyond any term code discount that might be offered if the invoice is paid during the discount period. Discounts can be entered as either a percentage off or a flat amount. Accpac then displays the extended amount again, factoring any discounts. The next field is the weight unit of measure. If weight is assigned to the item in inventory control, Accpac displays the weight unit of measure and the weight of the item. The extended weight is calculated by multiplying the quantity by the unit weight. If the vendor has their own unique number for the desk light, and if the item was linked to the vendor within the vendor details icon in inventory control, their item number appears here in the vendor item number field automatically. You can optionally accept it or enter a different item number. The purchase order can print the vendor's item number so they can easily recognize it. Next, accept or enter the date the item is expected to arrive. If a date is entered in the arrival field in the purchase order header section, that date becomes the default. If the item is to fill a back-ordered item entered on a sales order in order entry, enter or select the sales order number in the order number field. After the item is received, the shippable back orders report can be printed to reflect the sales order that can then be fulfilled. Only one sales order can be entered. Optionally enter any comments or instructions to print on the purchase order for this item detail, or for reporting purposes later. To enter a comment or instruction, click the blue up arrow and then choose either comment or instruction. Comments may be shown for the customer to see on purchase order documents, where instructions may appear on a receiving slip for the warehouse staff. The next field, Quantity Received, displays the number of items that have been received to date so far. Obviously, for new purchase orders, this is 0. However, when inquiring on existing purchase orders that are partially received, this field can be viewed to determine if any items have been received yet. The Quantity Outstanding field displays the number of items that are still to be received, presumably if there are no cancellations. The expense account is used if the item being entered is not added within inventory control, in other words, a non-stock item. Items such as office supplies, where the item is not listed in inventory control because stock levels and costs are not tracked. Non-stock items default to the non-stock account identified within the options icon, although the account can be changed. If the entered item is a non-stock item, the non-stock clearing account associated with the item's account set appears. The account can be changed if necessary. Stocked items added in inventory control do not use these two account fields. When entering the item number earlier, if a manufacturer's item number was entered instead of the inventory item number, the program displays the manufacturer's item number entered in the manufacturer's item number field here. Manufacturer's item numbers can be used in place of the actual internal item number, such as a UPC code. As discussed earlier, the manufacturer's item number is similar to a mapping table, where entering either item number references your internal item number. And finally, optional fields. This is where optional fields specific to this item detail are entered. Optional fields assigned to the purchase order as a whole are entered using the Optional Fields page here. Optional fields are discussed in the Sage Accpac Optional Fields course. Although Accpac automatically calculates tax when necessary based on the tax settings established with the vendor and item, the Item Tax button is used to view or change the item side of the tax calculation. For example, You may have an item that is normally not taxed, but for some reason it is taxed for this particular purchase. The taxes settings on this window default to the tax settings established when the item was added in inventory control. Whichever item is highlighted when selecting the Item Tax button determines which tax settings are displayed. In addition, selecting the Item Tax button is the same as pressing the F9 key to zoom in and view all the fields for the item on one window, as discussed earlier. If any tax settings are adjusted for the item while entering the purchase order, click the Calculate Tax button to have the system recalculate the new tax values. The Consolidate button consolidates multiple detail lines if the same item exists more than once on the purchase order. Multiple detail lines containing the same item may occur when generating purchase orders for multiple requisitions. Provided the location code is the same and no drop ship information is specified, the detail lines are merged. The Taxes page displays the tax settings for the vendor side of the tax calculation process. Calculating taxes in purchase orders observes two components: whether the specific item is taxable and if the vendor is taxable. Purchase orders refers to the tax matrix in Common Services discussed in the System Manager course to determine if the item-vendor combination is taxable or not, and if it is, what the tax rate is. The item side of the matrix is determined on the Details tab using the Item Tax button discussed earlier, where the Taxes page here determines the vendor side of the tax calculation. The tax settings shown in this window default from the vendor profile within Accounts Payable or from the template. Make changes to the tax settings on this window if this particular order requires a tax override. Changes made here do not affect the default tax settings for the vendor. It overrides this order only. Normally when making tax changes for a vendor, the tax authorities remain the same. It's usually the tax class code that's adjusted. For chloride systems, the default settings show it as taxable. If for some reason this purchase order should not be taxed, change the tax class to the code that represents non-taxable. Then click the Calculate Taxes button to refresh the tax amounts. The Optional Fields page displays any optional fields assigned to the purchase order. Optional fields are discussed in the Sage Accpac Optional Fields course. If multi-currency is installed and configured for the database, a rates page is available. This is where the exchange rate information can be changed if the vendor's source currency is different from your company's functional currency. Optionally change the rate type, the date associated with the exchange rate, or the actual rate itself. The Totals page displays the Purchase Order Totals window. Optionally enter a general comment that prints on the purchase order. Observe the total weight of the items on the purchase order for those items where weight was entered, and enter the number of labels needed. A label will need to be printed to place on the envelope that goes to the vendor, if following the purchase order. Also observe the order subtotal, any entered discounts, the calculated tax amount, and the order total. The bottom portion of the window contains another row of buttons that are visible from any page. Click the Post button when the purchase order is ready to be posted and submitted to the vendor. Click the Delete button to completely remove the purchase order. To delete a specific detail line, highlight the line and press the Delete key. The History button inquires on previous purchases for the item vendor combinations. For example, you may want to know which vendors you purchased fluorescent desk lamps from in the past. Choose Item Number in the Select By field and enter the desk lamp item number. Then click the Go button, this double blue arrow, to display the matches, or press F7. This inquiry window also provides for further drawdown into the details of a particular document by highlighting the document and clicking the Details button. If selected, This would display the invoice information as well as all associated documents, such as credit notes or receipts, that have been posted that relate to the document. When the purchase order is complete, click the Post button to post it. Then optionally print the purchase order immediately or save the printing for later.
Let's take a look at the receipt entry function.